The chairman of the House Oversight Subcommittee on National Security, Ron DeSantis, is now calling on House Speaker Paul Ryan to declassify the Trump dossier files. This comes as Senator Dianne Feinstein released the full testimony of Glenn Simpson. He's the co-founder of that firm behind the dossier, Fusion GPS. Congressman Ron DeSantis, he joins me right now. He also sits on both the Judiciary, House Judiciary, and Oversight and Government Reform Committees. Congressman, good to have you here. Where are we right now on this? Because it feels as though it's been going on and on and on and on. And we all still have a whole lot of questions, and I know you do as well. Do you feel like you're making any progress?
Well, I think we are. Actually, the Fusion GPS transcripts of Glenn Simpson testimony, I thought was really devastating to people who have been supporting the dossier. I mean, in those transcripts, Simpson claims that the FBI had an informant inside the Trump campaign. That's verifiably false. He claimed that Christopher Steele went to the FBI because he just had this crisis in confidence of what was going on. He felt he had to do it. He didn't mention that one of the top-ranking Justice Department officials, Bruce Ohr's wife, worked for Fusion GPS. It's much more likely that that's the reason why the FBI got involved. And then he claimed, incredibly, that even though he personally met with that Russian attorney, Natalia Veselakaya, the day before, the day of, and the day, and the day after the Trump Tower meeting with Don Jr. and Manafort, he said, well, I never knew that. We never discussed that. If you believe they never discussed that, meeting the day before, the day of, and the day after, then I got oceanfront property in Arizona I'd like to sell you. So it just wasn't a credible presentation. So I think the reason why I want to declassify this stuff is because there's been so much misinformation and disinformation put out, propagated by groups like Fusion, but also by the press, which has their narrative, and they want to further it. And I think the American people could learn the truth by just releasing the documents so that we know how all this transpired.
What do you think really happened? I mean, the concern, of course, being that possibly our government used a phony document, a politically motivated document by this Fusion GPS to then go in and wiretap the Trump campaign. Do you believe that may be the case?
So I have not been able to review the documents yet. We're going to try to get all the House members to have access. I obviously want to have access personally, but credible reports that I trust have said that this dossier was used to get surveillance. And so the question is, Trish, one, did the FBI know that this was funded by the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton? And if they did, and they still used it, without really corroborating anything, because remember, James Comey, even as late as the spring of 2017, said this thing was unverified. So why would you use it if you know it was political opposition research? But I think the flip side's also interesting. If they didn't know it came from the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton, then how much due diligence did they really do on this document? Did they just take it at face value? So I think we need to know what all else was going into this. I want to know what the role of Peter Strzok, the infamous FBI agent who said we can't afford to take the risk of a Trump presidency and you need an insurance policy. He was one of the lead agents on both the Hillary case and the Trump-Russia collusion. I want to know more about the role of Bruce Ohr, whose wife worked for Fusion GPS, and I want to know more about the relationship between the FBI and Christopher Steele. The answer to all those questions, I think, will better inform, was this an example of the government really working with one campaign against another? If so, that's obviously very, very problematic.
Yes, indeed. And, you know, I suppose mission accomplished as far as Russia goes, because if they were feeding disinformation to us via Christopher Steele, then they've succeeded in creating this kind of chaos and lack of trust in the very thing that makes us the great country we are. George Papadopoulos, let me ask you about him, because he's now being focused on as one of the reasons why the FBI may have gotten involved in all of this. So that's a little bit of a twist and turn in the narrative, in that first we were hearing maybe it was because of the dossier. Now it's because, well, George Papadopoulos was effectively saying that there were connections with the Russians that would perhaps reveal Hillary Clinton's emails during that campaign, and that is what may have prompted them. What do you think of that story?
Well, to me, that seems like somebody's interested in putting out information to de-emphasize the role of the dossier, because I think people who may have been involved with this know the dossier is problematic, and it's not going to make them look good if they were involved in that. So I think that was put out deliberately. I mean, look, here's my thing. I don't know if it was true or not, but I can tell you that to start a major investigation based off some drunk 28-year-old talking about saying Russians have dirt on Hillary, I mean, I don't know that they would start investigations on something so thin. So in some ways, the dossier, even though it was not verified and it's really been discredited, at least it's alleging things that would be serious if true. Papadopoulos just saying, hey, we hear the Russians have dirt on Hillary. I think that would be very thin to start an investigation. So I am definitely interested in how the investigation started. I'm more interested in what was done with this stuff to spy on Americans. But I think that that's an important question, and it doesn't really make sense to me that Papadopoulos would have been the main guy. And remember, even as early as a couple months ago, James Clapper, the head of National Intelligence, said he had never heard of Papadopoulos before.
No, I mean, you ask all the right questions here. I think Americans deserve answers for sure, because it's very disturbing. When we think about the Russians being able to infiltrate our system, this is one example. If they were able to put this disinformation out there where they could have really done some damage, and by the way, they kind of already have, because here we are talking about it. Anyway, I hope you get the answers you need. Thank you so much, sir. Good to see you today.
Thank you.
President Trump pushed through tax reform, so what should be next on his agenda? The CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase is giving his assessment of the brand new law and tells Maria Bartiromo what he wants to see next from this administration as we look ahead here on Sunday Morning Futures.
No, I'm not aware of. I know there have been referrals. I'd have to defer to the Department of Justice for where that is in the process.
But you can't say that it's been disposed of, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. Let me bring you in, Mr. Higgins, about kind of the nature of the information. Do you work, or have you worked in your career at the CIA in what is called a SCIF?
Yes, sir.
What is that?
A SCIF is a sensitive compartmented information facility.
And what's the purpose of it?
It is a secure facility in which one can handle sensitive compartmented information.
So if I have that type of information, TSSCI, am I allowed to store it in my office if my office isn't certified as a SCIF?
There are rules for handling classified information. I wouldn't want to misstate those rules, but as a general principle, compartmented material should be stored in a SCIF.
And so could I bring it home, even if I lock my door at night, put it in my nightstand, if I lock my bedroom door, would that meet the qualifications of having SCI information if it wasn't certified as a SCIF?
Unless you have a SCIF in your home, generally no.
Okay. And we have a SCIF underneath the Capitol here. We have briefings here for members of Congress. And when you are going into the SCIF, there are certain protocols that you got to follow, correct?
Yes.
All the files have to be locked up at the end of the night, correct?
That's correct.
And when the SCIF is unoccupied, the door's got to be locked. You can't just leave it open, right?
That's correct.
And you're not allowed to bring phones or electronic recording devices in the SCIF, correct?
That is correct.
So if I want to sit there and listen to the briefing about payments to Iran, if that's classified and we're down in the SCIF, if I want to bring my my iPhone to check my email or to check news clips, I just can't do that, right?
I would hope not.
Okay. Now, has it happened at the CIA or any of the other agencies where employees have brought that type of electronic media into a SCIF?
I'm sure that people do on occasion accidentally bring electronic devices in. There's a protocol for them reporting that to your security officers and removing it from the building as soon as you discover that you have it.
And I would say that there's probably been instances where SCIFs have been unlocked overnight or been unattended and been unlocked, and there's also procedures for reporting that, correct?
Yeah, I have no immediate personal knowledge, but I'd assume that there are such cases.
Okay. And why do you have to immediately report it? I mean, mistakes happen?
To assess whether there were any consequences of a SCIF, for example, having been unlocked or an electronic device having been brought into a SCIF.
Which, and the consequences could mean that that information is exposed to hostile actors?
Potentially exposed one way or another.
Okay. And if that happens, what happens at the CIA if somebody is not shown themselves to be able to handle this in accordance with the applicable rules and regulations? Is that something that employees have faced consequences for?
Sir, I'd prefer not to speculate or answer a hypothetical. It's a case-by-case basis, depending on the...
It's not a hypothetical. I'm saying, have there been consequences for employees who have not followed the proper protocol in the past?
If people fail to follow security protocols, there are consequences ranging from a conversation with the security officer to administrative action and up from there.
Okay. And administrative action could mean loss of security clearance?
Depending, again, it all very much depends on the facts of the case at hand.
Now, there's an issue about whether classified information is marked or not. Does the fact that it has markings, if something is not marked, does that mean it's not classified?
If information is classified, it should be marked as classified, both portion markings and headers and footers on the beginning and end of the document. But the lack of a classification marking does not mean that the material in question is not necessarily classified.
And if you have, if we have people that are forward and, you have things like signals intelligence and human intelligence, you can get that in forms before it ends up getting reduced to a document, correct?
Yes, one could.
And the fact that, then if I got that, I could not then go to an email system or an unclassified area and reduce that to writing if it's not properly protected, correct?
When classified information is reduced to writing or put on an electronic system, it should be put on a system that is